Yes, we are.
We are live. Okay, let's begin. I've been so excited about this event tonight. Welcome to tonight's Authors Talk with one of this year's Read Me featured authors, Marpheen Chann. I am Allison Maxell. I'm from the Maine State Library, and I am here with
Liz Sinclair. I am from the Maine Humanities Council, and
I'm Gibson Fay LeBlanc of the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance.
Great. So we're going to be hosting tonight. Each year we partner to bring Read Me, a summer community read program featuring Maine authors to public libraries and their communities across Maine. This summer, celebrated Maine author Jed Coffin recommended Marpheen Chann's Moon and Full and Shannon Bowring's Road to Dalton as must-reads. If you're interested in checking these books out, reach out to your local public library. Yay, local public libraries. We have over 60 libraries actually participating again this year. So I'm going to turn it over to Liz to talk about some of the logistics for tonight.
So before we hand the mic over to Marpheen, we've got a few things just to quickly go over. Again, please join us for Shannon Bowring's talk on Thursday, August 15th at 7 p.m. It's going to be fantastic. You can get further information at mainehumanities.org. As Allison said, we're recording this talk in hopes of making the archive available to everyone. So we're also connecting to Facebook Live, and welcome to everyone joining us there. It's great to have you. For those of you who are joining via Zoom, if you have questions, because we will have time for questions, please click on the Q&A button or the chat button and just type in your question. For those on Facebook, all you have to do is type your questions into the comments, and I'll make sure that they get to Gibson as he's selecting questions to ask Marpheen. And as you're probably aware, internet connectivity can sometimes become very unstable. This is definitely true for the three of us, as we are all coming to you from our respective corners of Maine. Should one of us abruptly disappear, know that we're doing our best to find our way back. And thanks so much for understanding.
And so now for what we're really all here for, because we've been waiting to talk with Marpheen, tonight's featured author. Marpheen Chann is an author, thinker, advocate, and speaker on social justice, equity, and inclusion. Moon and Full, his contemporary coming-of-age story, shines light on one young man's search for truth and compassion in a complicated era as it unwinds the deep-seated challenges we all face finding our authentic voice in true identities. Chann's heartwarming journey weaves through housing projects and foster homes into houses of worship and across college campuses, and playing out in working-class Maine, where he struggles to find his place. We welcome you, Marpheen, and congratulations on being selected as one of this year's Maine Reads authors. We're delighted to have you here.
Thank you for having me, and a big shout out to Maine Humanities and Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance, and then the Maine State Library for hosting this phenomenal program. I think when the news was announced that Moon and Full and then Shannon's book, Road to Dalton, were the Read Me picks, I think it was sort of surprising because, I've heard from other authors that sort of the second year or third year of a book, it kind of tapers off. And so in the second year of the book being out, sort of hearing that it was picked to be the statewide read was pretty phenomenal. And I've been so honored to visit libraries and bookstores in just this past year, just because they heard of the book through Maine Humanities and Maine Writers Publishers Alliance and the Maine State Library. So a big thank you for helping to spread word about the book and giving this a second wind of sorts. I was asked to pick out a portion to read, and I really was struggling to figure out, what do I want to do? Read something that I haven't read really to the public or at book talks, or do I want to stick with the script and, the top sort of 5 passages that I tend to pick on? And because we're still in the month of July, and because even though it's not July 4th, but I think the themes of July 4th and the themes of this particular year, it being a very uh, political year. I think many of you know I'm a political person, and I'm very involved. Um, I figured this, because we're still in July, it might be a good time to pick a passage that focused on what I see America as, and what my parents, my refugee family, um, saw America as when they came to these shores from Cambodia and from escaping the genocide in Cambodia. And so um, I don't think I've ever read this passage in front of a crowd before, so you can all say that you're the first to hear me read this passage out loud. Although I am working on the audiobook, so just be mindful of that. This passage is towards the end of the book. So if you do happen to have a copy of the book and do want to follow along, it's on page 230. And I could have easily picked a passage that had views of Maine, or was about Maine and my life growing up in Maine. But I imagine many of you want to hear. You've read about the story on the back of the cover. You maybe have read some of the story or all of it. But the question I get from a lot of folks before they even read the book is, did you ever end up reuniting with my family? So not sure if that's a spoiler or not, but I do end up reuniting with my biological family. So this passage is very dear to me, in sort of what has helped frame my thinking around different issues that are going across the country. So on page 230, about midway, it's the paragraph that starts with San Diego. San Diego is laid out in grid fashion, rather than the mishmash of streets intersecting at a million different angles and tightly packed, as if we were still riding around in a horse and buggy, like we find in Maine. San Diego also had a visibly superior bus system, for obvious reasons, being a bigger and more public transit-dependent city. I mused on this while listening to my grandmother babble away in Cambodian. I liked listening to the modulations of her voice, even if I didn't understand what she was saying. We stopped to fill a 5-gallon tank with water and grab some ingredients at the Cambodian grocer. But the major stop was the Cambodian temple. Besides the kitchen, I could tell this was one of my grandmother's happy places. The temple is a focal point for the Cambodian community, heavily frequented by the elderly to fill not only their spiritual needs, but also their social needs, which is the case with churches too. Religion provides community, a sense of belonging, a sense of home away from home, and a place to show off your long-lost grandson. Even if I did greet the first elder I met with a handshake rather than clasping my hands and giving a slight bow. As my grandmother picked up some food at an open market at the temple, her friends tried to feed me. I fumbled greetings, blushed like a 5-year-old, smiled, nodded, and laughed my way through conversations as my grandmother continued to introduce me, and the elderly ladies smiled and spoke to me in Cambodian. Even though I didn't know what they were saying, I always had a knack for listening. And so I listened intently to inflections in their voices and changes in tone. I found myself nodding and smiling at various points as if I did understand. I think they must have noticed, because they continued to speak Cambodian to me as if they were willing it back into my conscious mind. I likened it to something like phantom pain, but instead of feeling pain in toes that I no longer have, I have an inkling of understanding a language that now eludes me. Language is all around us, and we take it for granted. It is passed on to us. It evolves. It grows with us. It becomes an extension of us, the expression of our identity. Many kids like me who grew up in a bilingual or multilingual home understand this. The pressure from the dominant culture to speak only English, despite an increasingly interconnected world and a smorgasbord of languages, has the power to sever the extensions and expressions of ourselves through the language of our immigrant parents and grandparents. Although I have picked up a few more phrases here and there since this visit, it remains merely an echo of what it used to be. In the 2 weeks that I was with my Cambodian family in California, we visited beaches, piers, and parks and did a lot of fishing, which, if you're familiar with Cambodian culture, is a hobby that seems to be akin to a cultural tradition. One evening, Salute and Sally, my uncles and aunts, and their friends asked me if I wanted to go fishing during the grunion runs. I had no clue what a grunion run was, but pieced it together when they described it as a seasonal event when these silver fish ride the waves to shore to reproduce. We went at night when the tides were highest. Armed with buckets, we scoured the beach for signs of the fish. At first, there were only a few here and there, but as the tides came in, swarms of silverfish flooded the beach. It was one of the most fun experiences I'd ever had, running beneath the moon and trying to catch the flashes of silver in my hands. With a little practice, I soon settled on a method, impressing Uncle Salute, who characteristically said, "Damn, Marpheen, you're good at this, huh?" After we had a good amount of fish in our buckets, we rode home to show off our evening catch to my grandmother. She smiled and inspected the fish as we plopped the buckets down in the tiny kitchen. She knew just what dishes she could use them in. For the 4th of July, we headed to Mission Bay, where we had a barbecue, played games, and as night fell, settled on the shore to watch the SeaWorld fireworks from across the bay. From our little patch of beach, I heard a mix of Cambodian and English. On one side of us, I heard Spanish. On the other side, Vietnamese. The clusters of people around us had packed different foods and played different great games and different music while celebrating one America, a multicultural America. Back home in Maine, every 4th of July celebration I'd been to had involved mostly white people. But here, I was celebrating the holiday with people who looked like me. It gave a whole new meaning to what Independence Day actually represented. Not America's past, but America's future. I felt the sense of America becoming something different, something more. In that moment, America was the land that my refugee family had dreamed of as they fled the Khmer Rouge. Some Americans say that immigrants and refugees don't, quote unquote, share our values. They couldn't be more wrong. It is this mixing of languages, traditions, faiths, and foods, all in the name of liberty, freedom, and the American dream that makes America worth fighting for and protecting. People who uproot their lives to flee persecution based on their religion or political views are exactly the people who share the American values we hold so dear. They know the yearning and longing to breathe free. They understand equality and fair treatment. They who fled tyrannical governments, despotism, corruption, and disorder understand the importance of the rule of law. If there is any group of people who America should look to in reinvigorating our commitment to democracy, freedom, and equality, it is those who come to America in search of those very same things. A true democracy doesn't exist in a static state. It is a necessary thing for a democracy by, for, and of the people to change with the people who constitute and participate in it. A truly healthy democracy exists in a state of progress and change. Given that the majority of students in U.S. public schools today are from minority backgrounds, the multiracial democracy rising up could break new ground as a democracy that is bolstered by a diverse people with diverse religions, beliefs, cultures, and traditions. It will not come without bumps in the road, but if we each commit to guiding America along its path toward a multiracial democracy, while addressing our past sins and transgressions, it is exactly the America that our families dreamed of when they made the choice to leave their home countries. I hope that passage resonated with many of you today and, continue to reflect on that after the talk. But I thank you again to Maine Humanities, Maine Writers Publishers Alliance, and Maine State Library for featuring the book this year and for inviting me to do this talk. I'll hand it to Gibson.
Thanks, Marpheen. That was great to hear you read from that section of the book. It's certainly timely to be thinking about with an election coming up and thinking about who we are as a country. And so we have lots of questions for you. I have lots of questions for you with the help of my colleagues. And I know that there's questions out there in the audience, and encourage people to start putting those in the chat. Anytime you have one, you can put it in the chat and we'll take a look in a little while at those and start pulling questions from there. But Marpheen, I thought we could start tonight by I want to know personally, when you first knew you might be writing a memoir or writing a book, writing your story down, when did you start to think this was something that you might do?
Yeah, 2014, summer of 2014, it was a summer right before I started law school. So I'd been accepted into law school, was, riding that high, and, that was 2 years after I actually reunited with my biological family. 2012 was when I went out to California, and roughly where this book ends. And so I had 2 years. I think another part of the book I wrote, that I thought I would have so many answers, which I, did to some degree, reuniting with my family, but I actually left California with a lot more questions. How do I reconcile both my Cambodian identity and my American and Mainer identity? And so, 2 years of stewing on those questions. And 2014, a former governor wanted to cut general assistance for asylum seekers. And even though my family are refugees, asylum seekers are essentially folks who are on their way to becoming refugees. They just haven't had that legal status of being called refugees quite yet. Even though my family were refugees, I grew up remembering food stamps, remembering, living in low income housing, housing subsidies, all these different programs that helped my family, not fall through the cracks. Obviously, they can only do so much, and some of us do fall through the cracks. Fortunately, I didn't fall through the cracks, and I think that's largely because of the support system around us, teachers, caseworkers, guardian ad litems. And so I felt really activated by this issue, seeing it in the news. And so I reached out to Maine Immigrant Rights Coalition, Maine Equal Justice Partners, and a few other orgs who were organizing this rally in Monument Square. And I said, hey, how can I be involved? And so helped design some of the signs. So you might see photos from that rally in Monument Square. I designed those signs, placards that people held up. And then they asked me if I would share my story. And so that was for the first time I'd actually written my story, even though it was a 5-minute speech. Well, granted, they told me I only had 5 minutes, but I believe I spoke for like 6 or 7 minutes. And it was the first time I'd written my story down from birth to that point in time, college, after college, about to start law school. And standing up there and sharing my story, shaking uncontrollably, grasping the podium. My knuckles are so white. So you can imagine brown hands turning white for once. And was very nervous about sharing my story, but really got into it because as I was sharing the story, I was looking at the crowd and seeing like how it was impacting them, and just seeing people from all backgrounds, whether they were white, black, Asian, Hispanic, Jewish, or otherwise, they found some piece of it that they connected to, and to see them cheering and uplifting the story and becoming a part of it in that moment. I'm sure many writers, including you, Gibson, have felt sort of like a wind beneath their wings that sort of gets you writing. And before I knew it, I'd written another 30 pages, single spaced, granted in very rough shape, but that's what really got me starting to write my story down. And at that point, I was like, well, that's a lot. So I should just keep writing, and maybe, I could add the title of author at some point by publishing a book.
That's great. It's a great leaping off moment for a writer, a very public one, right?
Yeah.
And as an aside, I mean, there were a lot of rallies during that time. I'm fairly certain I was there with my two then young kids in the
Yeah.
crowd, because I think I remember that. So
I'll have to look at the photos.
yeah. So you mentioned that boost, and then those first 30 pages. What was your writing process like from there in terms of getting the rest of the book, at least a draft or
Yep.
the beginning of a draft down?
Well, I think a lot of the general advice writers often give other writers is just force yourself to write every single day, no matter what. I did not follow that advice. Because law school takes a lot out of you. I think, you know, um, learning to write in a legal way kind of impacted my writing because, there's a little bit of a pattern where it starts out very factual and then builds up to an argument. Um, and then tails off into some more abstract. And so law school had a huge impact on my writing. And I think that coming back every sort of 3 months or 6 months and picking it back up again was actually in the long run pretty good for me because there's some pretty heavy subjects in the book. Some things I had to dig into that I wasn't quite sure how time and distance and memory all warps during those that when you're in the present and you're trying to think about the past. And so having extra time between each sort of writing spree actually allowed me to go back and talk with family, talk with friends and former neighbors, and actually said like, hey, this is how I remember something. And it didn't happen a lot, but there were a few times where actually the timeline was wrong, where something that happened in sixth grade actually happened in eighth grade and vice versa. So it was a good fact checking experience, but definitely taking my time. I think 8 years it took to write, the full, I think when I submitted it, it was 85,000 words or 90, got cut down. But yeah, 8 years to write that amount of words, but also a lot of interviewing, phone conversations. The toughest piece was that talking with my biological mom and my biological grandmother about these things, I had to be careful because it was triggering for them to talk about the genocide or to talk about how they had to face the news from the court that we were never going to be reunited with my mother and all those types of things. And it wasn't just traumatic for my mother for us to be separated from her. It was also very traumatic for my grandmother, who, probably to this day, always asks the question, why didn't they just leave my grandkids with me? And so I had to navigate not only my own trauma, my own history, my own memories, but also that of my um, biological family, that of even my foster family who experienced some trauma when we got ripped from them. Um, and obviously talking with this about my adoptive parents has become a lot easier, especially around coming out and religion. But at the same time, when I started writing this, I was not in a place to fully talk with them about all these feelings. And so this book also became sort of my long-winded explanation to them of this is how I felt during these periods of times. And this is how it came across, and this is how I've reflected on it. And I came out on the other end very happy with where I ended up with, you know, not to overuse the word grace, but I think writing and reflecting it helped me to process all of these things that were just living in my head and my heart, which writing does for any writer. So.
Yeah. I mean, and I just, yeah, I want to salute you for the perseverance of those 8 years, you know, for sticking with it. I know what that takes myself, and I know a lot of other writers who, and I think, you know, there's all sorts of writing advice floating out there, and I always tell people to just do what you need to do, right? And which is what it sounds like you figured it out, right? And that process worked beautifully. That sort of recursive writing a little bit at a time, going and talking to people, doing more, you know, going back. So you write in the book, this is a quote, while I didn't experience the trauma that my mother experienced, I did experience the trauma of an empty stomach. The number of days that I went to school hungry swirled together in an indiscernible haze. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that experience of food insecurity firsthand, what that taught you, and maybe what it teaches you about that larger issue in Maine. It's obviously something that we're still grappling with.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think we have a view in society writ large that trauma is only is experienced once and never again. Even though we have the totally opposite, it's like sort of a cognitive dissonant type of thing that we carry around with us, is that let the past be the past, and let's move on and not be affected by it. But we don't understand that trauma unaddressed still has physiological impacts on us as we interact with other people, interact in our work, and interact in our communities. And I see this every single day at the, you know, as executive director of Maine, serving the Cambodian community. You know, some people might say, oh, that's just, you know, community drama or community this, or you know, just people being people. But the lens that I see is that it's actually the trauma manifesting. And so food insecurity for child in childhood is very, very troubling, because I think if there's no intervention early on, then it really does last a while. And um, the way you develop patterns, because so many patterns get developed in childhood, you know, so around food, if you are only eating you know, highly processed foods, because that's the only food that at the time WIC and SNAP highly favored, you know, starches and highly processed foods and sugary foods. And so if a whole family is hooked on those foods because that's the only food that they're allowed to purchase, or can afford to purchase because highly processed foods are cheaper, think about how that affects brain development, affects stress, exacerbates stress, inflames it, and then how that stress and that trauma from then impacts how they interact, you know, productivity at work or with each other. And so for me, you know, ramen noodles, not the healthiest food. Like, even though all of us kids were sort of like, oh, you know, they're like crackers. Um, I look at the packages when I walk by them at the grocery store, and I'm just like, how did we even stomach, you know, a ramen package, which by the way is like a folded brick, and only half of that brick is one serving, and that one serving has like 60% of your sodium or something. So a kid is eating 120% of an adult's sodium intake. And so for us kids in the low income housing in Riverton Park, our families were already struggling. And so, lots of rice, lots of highly processed foods, not enough money to afford fresh fruits and veggies and good proteins. And so, the studies are out there of what that kind of diet does to you. The Cambodian community is at risk for high blood pressure and diabetes. Cambodian Americans specifically, Cambodians in Cambodia, total opposite, because they have access to all the fresh fruits and vegetables that they can get. They don't have the same issues, but here in America, it's a big issue. And so the question I would ask folks to ponder is sort of what trauma, sort of low grade trauma or slow burn trauma are we inflicting on kids if they're only eating certain types of foods and can only afford certain types of foods. Um, sometimes I go visit and give talks at Maine schools, and I look at the kids' lunches, and some families are able to provide their kids with a lunch that's pretty nutritious, but kids who their families can't, um, the lunches there, those pizzas. I remember those pizzas very well. It's like cardboard bread and some tomato sauce. Um, and yeah, there was a salad bar, but kids aren't going to touch that unless it's appetizing. And so I always wonder sort of what, compared to France and compared to Japan, which have pretty great school lunches, it's a priority for them, for their kids. Um, what are we doing to our kids? And I think if we actually looked at the trauma of having a malnutritious um, childhood and school meals, it makes you wonder.
Mm, yeah. You referenced this a little bit earlier when you were talking, but I'd say one of the more difficult passages to read in the book is when DHHS arrives at your home to take you and your sister. You describe how you felt on that drive to your first foster home. It's heartbreaking for your mother, for you and your sister, your grandmother, caseworker, your foster family. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that, and looking back as an adult, any thoughts? Again, it's sort of the same question of like, what does that tell you about how we need to get better? What can we do to what's maybe already happening, or other things that could happen to improve that system?
Yeah. I hope people recognize that when I get angry in the book, or level some allegations, it's 99.9% towards what I see as a broken system. The people, whether they're caseworkers or people who interact with the system, like DHHS, or like a church or religion or any system, um, I think the systems are become the target in my eyes, and I think that doing that allows us to see that human beings are just caught up in bad, broken systems that are built to perpetuate themselves and are hard to overcome. And so, you know, when I talk about DHHS, I don't want to come across as, the caseworkers are awful people or the administrators are awful people. Um, as far as I remember, all the caseworkers are kind, gentle people. We have a few former caseworkers and social workers in the call here, um, but they were caught up in a bad system. Um, you know, um, for me, being ripped apart from our mother, um, that whole process was uh, interesting to say the least. when I walked home from school, and walked into the door, the caseworker handed us a black trash bag, and asked us, hey, um, put some clothes in there, your favorite things, and we're gonna go somewhere for a while. You don't just a kid can't make those decisions in whatever how many minutes are in that moment, especially when they see their mother crying on the couch with their sister. Um, Basically, their sister, my sister was catatonic, was not really, was blank in the face. Um, and to look at that situation and be like, oh, why did the caseworker do that? Blah blah blah. Again, caseworker was caught up in the system. The question then becomes, well, how is the system so under resourced where the answer is just to give a kid a black trash bag and tell them to put their belongings in there, and then that they're going to be taken away. So there's a lot of trauma just in that itself that the system perpetuates. And in terms of that drive, when we arrived in Acton at our first foster family, we pulled in. It was at nighttime. The porch light was on, and this was a pretty decent, middle class home. Um, 3 or 4 bedrooms. I can't quite recall because the sisters shared like the whole attic space that was 2 bedrooms somehow. Um, but you know, that didn't matter in that moment. It didn't matter how nice that home was, that and the 2-car garage home was. We had just been taken from our mom. These strangers appeared on the porch. And in any other situation, it would have looked like, a movie where the mom and dad are on the porch, they're sort of arm in arm looking out. And the teenage sisters are just off goofing off or something like that. Like, but it wasn't, a picturesque movie. It was a family that got a call probably just that day, and the caseworker said, we have 2 kids that we need to drop off tonight. And so for them, all of a sudden, 2 traumatized kids being put in a home, crying all night. I was crying and wrote in the book, staring at the wall in the nightlight and just crying, mommy, 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 like over and over again until I fell asleep. um I think that it it should make us question, why do we allow systems to get to a point where they dehumanize every person involved. um and I think, my hope is that it leads people to actually saying, when they see in the news today when a child dies, and the child welfare service and DHHS is being called in front of a state committee and being accused of all these different things. One of my hopes is that, one, we see it's the system that we've all helped create that is perpetuating this, and that the people involved um, are just being churned through it, and that the humans at work, the caseworkers, most of them are overworked and under-resourced. And so uh the trauma that I share in that particular story, I hope, my hope is that people don't try to blame the people in the story. There are a few exceptions, like, my mom's ex-boyfriend, who was an abuser, but overall, the hope I hope that people get out of this story that um have grace for the human beings in our lives, but look at how actions sort of cascade, when 100,000 people, 1 million people make decisions individually, but how that um, ripple effects.
Um, there's a great quote in the book, another one that says, where you say, throughout life, despite the ups and downs, I could never bring myself to harden my heart. And I think that speaks to what you were just talking about.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit more about that. What do you think helped you not harden your heart? What do you think helped you? Yeah.
I think it's always, as cliche as it sounds, it's always trying to see good in the world, particularly good in people. Um, but stopping and pausing, I think it was, I forget who the author was, but they wrote a book on the power of just being in awe of things. And, as much as I have distanced myself from evangelicalism, um, whether it's Buddhism or Christianity or religion or any spiritual practice, I think one of the big things is experiencing human awe of the world around us, both seen and unseen. And I think whether it's meditating, praying, or going on a hike or walking or swimming, kayaking, canoeing, especially in Maine where all of those things are readily at our footsteps, I think awe and wonder and curiosity um, keeps you from being too hopeless at times. Not to say that I haven't had those moments where I've been hopeless and have had, those dark periods of, wondering if I'm going to see the light of day, um, or if I'll make it through this crisis or this situation, or if I was going to pay rent or get another meal. Um, I think, for me, golden hours are my moment of awe. I have my desk, as I'm sure many people do, but near the window. And specifically in my neighborhood, there's a lot of big oak trees and whatnot. And so for me, I like sitting here during golden hour while I'm trying to wrap up work and then just looking out the window and seeing how the light filters through. Um, and as small as that might seem, I think that finding those little moments of joy and awe really does help um, propel you and to get you to think outside of the box in terms of thinking outside of your misery or your despair or your sadness. Um, and so religion had a hand in that. Books I think had a hand in that in terms of specifically fantasy books, which we'll talk about later, I'm sure. Being able to have an active imagination um, really helped. And so I think that for everyone, just finding moments, finding little things, big things, medium-sized things, to be in awe of or to be curious about, and to be joyful about really does do wonders. The other part of that is fellow human beings can inspire a lot of that as well. Um, I did a lot of I didn't know at the time, but I think they call it bibliotherapy. No, it's because I read like biographies on you know Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, LBJ, um, and all those great leaders had their times of morose and blue. And so when you actually look at that and be like, actually, it's not that different.
Right.
It's only when you feel like you're the only one. Um, there's a little bit of ego in that. Thinking that you're the only one suffering is when it gets real hopeless. And so I think finding people to stir up hope in you as well is a big thing.
Yeah, that's great. We've got a couple questions in the chat that we'll go to, and then I've got many more, but we are the clock is ticking. So Rachel is wondering, since reconnecting with your family, have you learned to cook any particular dishes from your childhood? Any particular foods that you've gone back to?
Look Lak is a beef salad dish. There are versions of it. I think it's called shaking beef in Vietnamese and Thai. And you can find versions of those in the local Vietnamese and Thai stores. But Look Lak is very special to me because it it's probably a little healthier in my opinion, but how it's made, how my grandmother makes it is it's a bed of usually romaine lettuce, arranged in a circle. There's tomatoes arranged in a circle on top of that. Um, and then sometimes cucumbers, but then there's marinated beef. And then my grandmother has hard-boiled eggs sliced up. And then you take that, and the real kicker is the lime and pepper juice sauce that really adds the cherry on top on that one. And so I've made less glorious versions of that. I have not perfected the pepper and lime sauce. Um, my grandmother, like some immigrant communities and similar to Italian and households probably as well, is they don't write the recipe down. And so
Right.
it's kind of hard, but that's one of them.
That's great. From Zoom, someone is wondering, Marpheen, what is it like recording an audiobook? And has it been difficult to do that? I see you've got a nice, it looks at least from here like you got a nice microphone going there, but
Well, I don't do it from home
you
because
go to a studio, yeah.
my computer is pretty loud. And so this microphone is so good it catches, the little fan noises in the thing. Um, but I joke that it's very difficult to record the audiobook because my voice lulls me to sleep. So when I go to the Portland Media Center to try and record it. So when I put the headphones on and I'm trying to read the audiobook, 10 minutes in I'll be dozing off. So it's very difficult in that aspect, but I think I'll make it through.
Let's see. What about music? Does music still play an important role in your life?
It does. I have a guitar. I don't have a full keyboard, but I have a little what they call a MIDI keyboard, so you can hook it in the computer for some recording stuff. I might have impulsively put up a song without really editing it on Spotify. If you wanted to look it up, but I'm not going to tell you the name to make it harder for you to look it up. But so I do dabble still. I think it's one of those things, again, going back to awe, wonder, curiosity, um, finding those tools to help soften the harder edges of life. Music is one of those things. So in the busy life that I have, returning to music is always a part of that.
Right on. You referenced this earlier, talking about writing a memoir and going back to talk to your family about things. You also call memory a fickle thing in the book. I'm wondering if you want to just say a little bit more about that. Anything you learned in
Yeah.
doing all that work to write this book and talk to all those people to try to get the story right.
Yeah.
And thinking about memory and how we all create our own memories all the time, and they're different from the memories of people who might have experienced the exact same thing. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Memory is, oof. Yeah. Big topic. It's a fickle thing because there's so many variables involved, right? There's time involved. There's, other people continually impacts how we remember things. And but I think memory is, a unique human ability that helps to that builds up, that stores up, becomes a reservoir that we form our identities on, our personalities. And the research is out there of how memory is key to that. And so the thing that I think that I also want to come across in the book is that, you know, people have to be easy on themselves and know that they are constantly changing and growing still. It granted it slows down as you get older, but I think you know you're still changing, you're still impacted, and so you know memory. You know, you got to save yourself at times because if you just hold on to particular memories, they're just gonna eat away at you, you know, and cause you to despair and to be hopeless. And so I think our brains kind of naturally, um, you know, figure out, you know, which memory to compress, which memories to let go of, or to make a little bit more fuzzy to make room for new memories. Um, and so I think that memory being a fickle thing is a necessary thing, but we also have to be careful in terms of how we remember things because um you know, for instance, we probably all have an experience of, you know, remember something in a particular way. You know, maybe we thought that we were a complete jerk to someone in this one instance, but then we talk to that same person 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, and they'll say like, "What are you talking about?" Like, you seem like a perfectly nice person in that moment. And so that's a small example of how memory can be a weird thing, because it's usually one-sided. It's how we view the outside world.
Yeah. We are running out of time. There's one very important question I don't want to leave off, which is that we got a little tie in here because, in addition to your book being a read me book, your memoir has also been selected to represent Maine at the Library of Congress National Book Festival in August, which is really cool. The festival theme this year is Books Build Us Up, and it explores how reading can help us help connect us and inform our lives. It's through books that readers develop strong bonds with writers and their ideas. You were talking about that earlier, right? Like learning from these biographies of other
Yeah.
people. So two-part question. What books have you read that have built you up? And this could be from when you were younger or all the way up to just what you read last week. And the second part is, how do you hope Moon and Full will build up your readers?
Yeah, you know, Redwall by Brian Jakes, which is a children's fantasy book series. C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia and Lord of the Rings, were all sort of fantasy books that I devoured in sixth, seventh, eighth grade, and continued to read and reread again over and over in high school, partially because I had a limited um, fantasy books that I could read. I couldn't read Harry Potter. So Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia were okay because they were kind of written by Christian authors. But I think that you know, especially Redwall, you know, being able to have my imagination invoked and activated to, you know, in the case of Redwall, to think about mice and rats fighting each other on sailboats and castle walls and badgers coming to the rescue and all those types of things. I think I really credit that as being able to give me an imagination to be able to dream, to be able to envision something of a different world. And I think that and learning empathy and characters, how they fight with each other and resolve things, had an impact on how I look at the world today. Is I'm still able to see a world in conflict, or a world, you know, that is, you know, we're at each other's throats, but I'm also able to see a world where it's brighter for all of us and we're all working together towards a common goal. And so I think for um for youth, especially today, they have something very valuable that I didn't have as much back then, which is books that are representative of them. You know, you have Black, Brown, Indigenous heroes. You have, you know, people who are queer representative books like Shannon Bowring's book, The Road to Dalton. There's queer. I don't know if I'm spoiling that book, but Read her book. You know, and so I think people being able to both imagine a different, better world, but also to see themselves represented in those worlds is so huge for adult life when you're able to dream of a future in a world that's better off than what it is right now.
That's great. Love the idea
And
of
Moon and Full, I'm
some,
hoping
yeah,
that it feels that way.
I was gonna say, you know, I'm hoping, I'm imagining those, especially maybe younger readers who are gonna be picking up your book, and I mean, all of us, of course,
Yeah.
but as I'm speaking in part as a father of teenagers myself, like they should read your book and you know, hear that story. And
Yeah.
anyways,
Well, I spoke at
um,
Wayne Fleet really quick. There was a Asian American girl that came up to me after that event, and she had a copy of my book, and they had me sign it. Um, and this is such a precious thing to see. But she saw me a year later, and she gave me a package of her greeting cards with her poems on it. And
wow,
so I have those on my desk, and to know that I had an impact like that is also huge.
that's amazing. I think we are out of time. I want to thank you, Marpheen, for the wonderful reading and conversation, and thanks to our audience, Allison and Liz. I don't know if either of you wants to jump back on and say anything, but it's been a lovely way to spend an hour. um, and for those who haven't read Marpheen's book, I know that I think there will be people who will be wanting to go out and read it now.
And thank you all. Thank you, Gibson, and thank you, Marpheen and Allison, and all of you for being here. So if you're interested in reading Moon in Full or really anything else, please connect with your local library or your local bookseller. And we'll see you again on Thursday, August 15th at 7 p.m. for a talk by Shannon Bowering, author of our other Read Me book this year, The Road to Dalton. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you for joining us.